Then the next round was entirely DSA, just having very active LinkedIn profile. So it was very common for me to get one job opportunity every week. So it's very important as a data engineer to learn your SQL logic first. But the key here is when you start preparing, you need to ensure the key areas in which you are weak. And the third way is that how I got the offer was through LinkedIn.
Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this particular podcast, we have a guest, Jash, who recently cleared his interview in Google. And in this particular podcast, he has shared everything from getting the call, from preparing for the interview, and what they ask in the interview. Each and every point we have covered. So I hope you learned something new. And if you do, then make sure you hit the like button. And without wasting time, let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. You recently cleared your Google interviews, and I was quite excited when you posted that on LinkedIn. So I wanted to invite you and wanted you to share your experience with my audience. So I have a lot of things to talk about in this particular podcast. And number one question I generally start with is understanding the journey, because all of the people who become a data engineer have different kind of journey. People come from web development, application development, and a lot of different backgrounds. So I want to start this particular podcast by understanding what was your journey when you got started with the data engineering.
So about my journey, I went to Nirma University, which is a college in Ahmedabad, and I did my BTech in IT there. I was always very good at data subjects. I know that most of the people, hate database systems in college, all those primary keys and whatnot. So, but it was always one of my strengths. So, uh, I was fortunate to get a first job right out of the college. That was my data engineering job itself. So, it was through the college placement, and ZS came into college. ZS is a management consulting firm, right? So it came into college and it was hiring for a business technology solutions profile. So this is a more generic profile. It doesn't mean that you're going to work on big data platforms specifically, but you're going to work on some sort of tech. So 50% of the role would be tech and 50% would be some consulting type of role. So where you'll have to present PPTs, make fancy PPTs, and make spreadsheet. So I would say that pretty much sums up consulting part. And so yeah, as soon as I joined ZS, I got to know that there are lots of different pods at ZS. Uh, and a lot of people wanted to go to big data pod because of the technologies that the pod were using, and I was fortunate enough to be segregated into that pod after first day itself. So there was no particular process to get selected into big data pod. So I was just, I guess, fortunate. And yeah, so that's when I actually first Googled what is big data and what is Spark after getting the job itself, after the job started actually. So yeah, I spent about 1 month there Googling all these things. And then at the start of my job, I always used to wonder, when I was in first staffed in a project, people were working on AWS, and they were creating Airflow to orchestrate the pipeline, and everything was running on Spark and SQL. And it was too overwhelming for me. I remember I asked my mentor, what are these boxes and on Airflow, and why is it green and red? And I, I'm just getting anxiety just by looking at it. Look at the number of boxes and all. So yeah, that's how the journey started. And then after a couple of years, in no time, I was an expert in big data, especially on AWS side, and then got promoted at ZS to senior data engineer. uh, I also mentored some folks and led a small team there. uh, got some experience on Snowflake as well as Azure side. And yeah, and then when I got the Google opportunity, I wasn't really looking for a change, to be honest. uh, I was just having very active LinkedIn profile, so it was very common for me to get one job opportunity every week. So this is like a good tip for all of those who are watching this video, that if you are in field like data engineering and data science and you have a active LinkedIn profile, it's definitely going to help you out a lot. So to it's a long story, to be honest. So I was actually offered from a very good startup, and it was a very dynamic startup. It was based in US, and the job was remote, and where they were paying me the north of 1 crore while I was able to live in India. So I thought this can be a good opportunity for me to learn something entirely new. And the startup was on blockchain technology itself. The role would still be on data engineering side. So that's when I first decided that okay, now is the time to do something new and leave GS. And after a couple of months, I decided to join Google because I had an offer from there.
So that's a quite unique journey. As I said, like a lot of people have different journeys. So in your case also, you also had different journey and you got the opportunity. So I want to understand, how did you start learning about various data engineering technologies and how you build your skill set?
Good question. Uh, so my role has evolved a lot since I first started. So when I first started, I was mostly working on PySpark transformation scripts. So these are like your normal SQL scripts when you join some tables and get a final output, but they are written in Spark to get the benefit of distributed compute engine.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. I did not have a holistic idea of what is happening inside the entire project, like where the data is coming from, what source data being it is being ingested into, and then what is the final layer, which we call the semantic layer, and then what are the analytics made out of it. So I did not have an holistic view in my first project. I was only focused on creating, these different fact tables. So to get that idea, it was very important for me to understand the data model concepts, because let's say I wanted to calculate some KPIs. Now I can obviously do that, but there's no way to Google it. For example, you can Google things like how do I center a div inside a div,
Yeah.
but you cannot Google things like how I join these two fields and get this answer. So these are very business specific. So it's very important as a data engineer to learn your SQL logic first very quickly, and then you can convert it into something like Python or PySpark, depending on what coding language you're using. So I would definitely say SQL would come first, and then slowly I started getting a holistic view that how we can orchestrate using something like Airflow, something like Glue in AWS, and then we can how to create an architecture from the get-go. So what storage to use, what compute to use. So these were the skills that which were required from as in some, I would say, semi architecture type of role. So to do this you need to understand any one cloud platform really well, and I believe in today's world being a data engineer, it's a key that you do that.
Yeah.
Because like 10 years back it was easy that things were on Hadoop and Hive and Pig, but now those migrations are coming into Spark, and even now people are avoiding Spark and going to directly something like Snowflake or BigQuery, where they can just type in something. So understanding of cloud is very much important. So I would say that's the second thing. And then third thing would be the big data distributed systems, whole ecosystem of Spark, Hadoop, and also the combination of that with one of the programming languages. And it would be good if it is either Java, Scala, or Python, because that's what I've seen mostly being used in the big data world.
So thank you for sharing your experience about how you learned about data engineering. Now I want to ask one of the most asked question on this channel is how to do a project, because you might have worked on a lot of different projects. So can you share one of the projects that you have worked on that you really liked, and that particular project also covers like various technologies of data engineering that comes together to build a final data engineering project?
I led this project in my last year at ZS, and this was entirely based on Snowflake. Now, I cannot give you the exact
Yeah.
architecture because of confidentiality, but the process is that you have data coming in from different platforms, can be SFTP or databases, whatnot, and you might as well have some live data as well, which can come from a pub sub service, which is like a publish
Yeah.
subscribe, something like Kafka, or uh, in AWS,
Messaging queue, like
Kinesis.
it's like the kinesis. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So we had both of these types of data, and we wanted to ingest them. And we also wanted to make sure that this entire process is completely configuration driven. So let's say a new data set comes in, we don't really want to code everything. So what we would do is we would create a configuration tables, different tables, which one table would have some information like what is the source, what is target, what are number of columns and whatnot. So it will automatically validate the schema. Then what are the standardizations that you want to perform? So all of these things you would just describe in a table, and these tables would be stored in something like AWS RDS. So operational user can come in and just set that up very well. And then the entire process starts, and the flow has to be automatic. So it has to be all event based. So we, in case of live data, we used a service like Lambda to trigger the event, or in case of batch data, we use directly S3 events where all the data was
Yeah.
stored in S3 and then it was triggered from there. So after that, the challenge was we had to do all of these things in Snowflake. Now we had experience of doing this in a Spark based environment, something like Databricks or EMR, where it was a file based system. But to do this on Snowflake was a completely new thing. And also, Snowflake had at that time, it did not have something called Snowpark. So, Snowpark is a latest API which allows you to write Python code in Snowflake now, but at that time it wasn't there. It's a very new feature, like came out a couple of months ago. So we had to also learn JavaScript because Snowflake had JavaScript stored procedure. So it was very challenging in terms of the tools that we had to learn. And then after it is inside Snowflake, we had to use its own compute and own storage and then connect it from therewards.
And so, as I understand, you work a lot on AWS also. So, can you share some of the AWS services that are highly used in data industry? So, whenever someone wants to learn about AWS cloud or any other cloud, they can focus on these services.
At the start, focus on services like AWS S3, EMR, EC2. So S3 for storage, EMR for Spark processing, EC2 for normal compute, where you can host your applications. Then services like Lambda, which allows you to trigger your code
Yeah.
in a serverless manner, and something like Redshift, which is like a semantic layer database. Yeah, I think this is sufficient unless you work in a startup where this tech stack gets very, complicated. So you might be working in SageMaker as well. You might be running some machine learning models, or you might be working on Tableau connected with your Redshift data.
Yeah.
So then that pipeline amount of things you're working on would differ. But these are definitely the basic services that you should know.
Yeah. So now we understood your journey and how you got started with the data engineering. Now I want to understand how did you get into Google, because one of the most important challenge in getting into these FAANG companies is getting the interview. You can apply to multiple websites such as LinkedIn, career page, and a lot of different things, but you generally don't get the interview call. So I want to understand how did you get interview call on the first place?
See, this differs from person to person a lot. So first step is the one that will differ a lot. How do you get an interview? It's so there are three, four ways to do this. One, the easiest way is to get a referral. So when you get a referral, how it works at Google is that you reach out to a person and then they will refer you. They won't refer you for a particular job, but you will have option to apply for three different jobs with the same using same
Yeah.
referral. So you can do that on your own, and I've seen that in couple of days you would get a reply. Even if you are not selected, you would definitely get a reply in 2 to 3 days or maximum a week. So that's one good thing about Google. Then another way to get it is to, as you mentioned, directly apply through the careers page. It also works most of the time. Getting a ref, it's not like getting a referral is the key. It only increases your chances by some percent. So if you have a good profile and your keywords and your resume matches with the job description, then there are chances that you might get a call. And the third way is that how I got the offer was through LinkedIn, where the recruiter reached out to me, that they are opening up Pune offices, and that's why Google is hiring a lot of people in Pune as well because it's a new office. So they are looking for somebody like me with experience in data engineering world. Now, again, this was a result of my active LinkedIn profile, but at that time, as I mentioned that I had already accepted another offer, and I was already on notice period in ZS, so I had kept my profile open for different roles, but specific to recruiters. So you see a little green badge that says open for work. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not there for me. I only kept it specifically privately for recruiters so they can reach out to me. So
Correct.
yeah, that's how I got the interview. And another way is to, obviously, if you know the manager, somebody in the team directly, there are lots of teams which are working in silo and then hiring directly. So
Okay.
if you know somebody who has a vacancy in their own team, they can just talk to their manager and then they can set up the interview.
So you talked about having active LinkedIn profile. So what do we really mean by having active LinkedIn profile and what you can do about it?
When I started my content creation journey on LinkedIn, I used to get about 20 likes a post. And at that time, I was really happy. Oh, look at this! I've got 1,000 impressions. So, but my goal was to just keep posting consistently. Now, consistently can mean a lot of things. For some people, it can be once a month. That's how I started, once a month. And then I scaled up to twice in a month, and then once a week, and now I'm posting twice in a week. So I try to post at least twice in a week. So a couple of years ago when I started this journey, I had almost no followers, and just this year itself, I have, in the half year itself, I've been getting over 3 million impressions on my all posts, and my follower count has increased a lot as well. So it's about posting consistently and also posting relevant content to what your professional aspirations are. So it's not really important that you post, if you are working in software development, you only post about that. But if you want to be a data scientist or an astronaut for that matter, you can post about that as
So as I understand, because of your LinkedIn profile, you got approached by Google and you got the interview opportunity. So the moment you received that particular message from the Google, how did you start preparing for the interview? Because you might have had like 15 to 20 days to prepare for the interview. So what was your strategy for clearing this particular interview?
well. So when I got a call from Google, I knew that what they were going to ask, because I have given a lot of data engineering interviews in my career, and most of them have been really good. So I wouldn't say I'm a better engineer than most of people, but I'm a really good interviewer. So when I'm in an interview, I have that confidence that I'm going to do something well because of those past experiences. So I knew what was going to be asked. But the key here is, when you start preparing, you need to ensure the key areas in which you are weak. In which you're strong, it's fine, it's not going to matter. So when I got a call, I had about couple of weeks to prepare for it. I also had an option to extend this to a month. So anytime Google approaches someone, you can extend this to a month. I haven't seen anybody given more time than that. But since I was already on notice period, I didn't want to take a lot of time. So I set up the first interview possible. And then while preparing during these 14 days, uh, I picked on the started with the strong parts, because these parts are something that I'm already good at. So let's say if I'm preparing for first 4 days on the parts that I'm good at, for me it was Spark and AWS and SQL. So first 4 days I gave it to those topics, and then next 10, 7 or 8 days I gave it to those topics which I was not so good at, them being DSA and those kind of questions.
Yeah.
So uh, because I kept the weak topics studied very near to the actual interview, I remembered them very clearly. So that was the tactic that I used. They have 4 different technical rounds, and then they have one
Right.
behavioral round. In Google, at least for my role, it would differ on what level you are at as well. So you might get one less or one more rounds like that as well. So I had a very specific process where the recruiter, she was in touch with me the whole time. She told me that there were these kind of questions that they can ask. Now, she didn't mention that this interview will contain this kind of question, but she mentioned 4 or 5 different topics on which they can ask different questions. So in my first interview, it was more like uh, very deep technical round where there were lots of questions, almost like a rapid fire, where they would test my knowledge on DSA and then SQL, distributed computing network, like something like Spark, and different topics like it can be anywhere from broadcasting or caching, something like that. Then also on uh, cloud based questions. So in first round, these were all different questions that they asked me. Then the second round was about after a week, where the question was s- entirely on data modeling, the first question. So here they would ask you a very abstract question that a company is launching this product, how would you create a data model? So this is just a vague example. So you need to answer a lot of counter questions and all. So when you create a data model, you need to define the keys and whatnot.
Yeah.
You can choose with normalized or denormalized approach, and then based on the data model that you have created, they will ask you some SQL questions.
All right.
So these would be very complex queries that would involve a lot of joins and all. So here, be careful about the data model that you're creating, unless you'll get caught while writing your own query. Then the next round was entirely DSA, where they had a couple of questions about medium difficulty. Uh, and then after that, there was another round, which was system design. Now, they asked a lot of big data questions here, like how would you design a big data pipeline? I had to actually draw out everything and all the components that I would be using. I also had to defend that which component, why did I pick this one over others. So you need to make sure that you're able to defend your architecture, and it has to be scalable and things like that. And they also asked a lot of Spark based questions, something related to, deep expertise, something like, let's say you have a job and it fails due to xxx reasons, what are the steps you would take? So these kind of questions. And after that, there was the last behavioral round, and they call it the googliness round. So here
Okay.
they, for this, just go through the values of Google, things like risk taking abilities, leadership. You need to demonstrate those in the answers that you give. And you need to be able to solve like 4 or 5 different scenario based questions. These are completely non technical, so don't do any technical deep dive, or don't use any technical terminology over here. I did, and the interviewer got frustrated. He was like, don't try to show off your technical knowledge. This is a man this is a managerial round. So yeah, just caution there. Yeah, that's about it. These are 5 different rounds that I had.
So thank you for explaining everything in detail about your interview process. One of the most highly questioned in data engineering is how much DSA is important. So can you talk about how much DSA is required and how much DSA did they ask you in your interview?
Right. So that's a good question, and that's a question that I've been getting a lot as well. I shared my interview experience on LinkedIn as well as on my YouTube, and most common question was, why is there DSA? Why are they asking DSA? But that's common. Every tech giant will do that, and the reason being, they also want to see your problem solving ability, not just the ability to write code. So even if you're not completely fluent in a language and you just create an algorithm, it is okay, but it is obviously preferable if you can write your own code. Now, easy to medium in the sense that you should have your basic data structures clear, something like arrays, linked list, and dictionaries, in Java terms, hash map. Then something like queues, stacks, and a little bit of trees as well. But don't go very deep into graph or DP. But that's that's my experience. It can be differing to other interviews. So yeah, I think preparing for these topics should be enough. And we can, for DSA there are tons of platforms available, like a rank hacker. So any we can pick any.
So just like everyone says, you should know like easy to medium questions. You don't need to learn about DSA of software engineering because they require you to go in a little bit detail. But as a data engineer, you can just focus on the basics of DSA and get started. Now I want to talk about the money part because in data engineering a lot of things. So one of the key attraction for people is money in data engineering. So can you explain like what is the average package provided by these companies and what you can expect from year to year?
So the data engineering role goes hand in hand with software engineering. There's not much of a difference there. So the I cannot reveal the exact package information or something, but I can give you a rough range. So we have, different levels at Google. It's starting from 1, 2, 3, and like that, right? So uh, it starts with L3 and then L4, L5. there are some roles in which L2 level is also there. So L3 would fall into the category where you would get around 35 to 45 lakhs. L4 would maybe get you around 50 to 70 plus lakhs, and L5 would be 75 plus to 1.5 CR as well.
Yeah.
And then after that, after L5, it's a hard bridge that a lot of people cannot cross. But since you're already earning a lot on L5, for many people, that's enough. So after L5, you get L6, L7, which are manager level or very
Yeah.
staff engineer types of level.
So again, thank you for sharing your interview experience and your knowledge. Do you have any final advice for our subscribers who are watching this particular podcast that can learn from you?
I would say, first of all, don't think that getting into companies like Google, Amazon, and all these Microsoft, when I say FAANG, it's not just FAANG, but related like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, all these companies would fall also into the category. Don't think that this is your only career goal. Your career goal should be to get a good job where you're happy and you're earning well. And there are many, many companies in India that does that. In fact, you would be surprised how many times companies like Google, Microsoft struggle to match these salaries. So don't fixate your happiness on something like this only. And second thing, don't over prepare for it. So when you over prepare, you get super nervous in the interviews, you are sweating, and you will mess up the answers that you already know. So don't do that. Maybe maximum 1 or 2 hours a day, not more than that, even when you have an interview tomorrow. It's not like I have an interview tomorrow, now I have to prepare 6 hours. Don't do that. And then for entering into data engineering world, is this world, I would say, is huge. It depends on where you are in the pipeline, data pipeline process, and your that from those lenses, how you perceive it, it can be very different. So even then, try to learn some common technologies like Spark and cloud-based technologies or one programming language really well. And if you do a lot of certifications, something like AWS certification or GCP or Spark based certifications, it will be really helpful in your career in a way that it can not only give you recognition, but it says that the skills that you have, you're saying it's verified.
Yeah.
And most of the companies pay for these certifications. So if you ask at your company as well, they would be happy to upskill you at their expense.
Josh also started his YouTube channel, so you can check link in the description and subscribe to him. He's also going to create a lot of content in the space of data engineering. So if you want to get different perspective from data engineering or want to get into FAANG and all other things, you can go check out his channel. If you want to learn how to create content on LinkedIn, because he got a job from the LinkedIn, right? So go please follow him so that you will also learn it and he will also grow in his career and share whatever he learns. So thank you just for coming and sharing your experience.
All right, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.